Recently, I watched the Sidney Lumet film Failsafe for the first time. 2 days later, I was lucky enough to see a 35mm print of the Stanley Kubrick classic, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. I later found out that both of these films were released just 251 days apart in 1964. How strange that two films, both covering the threat of nuclear annihilation brought about by a mistake, would come out so close to one another. It is actually not very surprising. 1963 and 64 were both volatile years in the Cold War, with the United States military expanding its efforts in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and after the events of 1962, a direct line between the US and the Kremlin was established, which appears prominently in both films. The Cuban Missile Crisis was over, but the threat that nuclear weapons posed had not left the public's imagination. It is not unsurprising, then, that two films about an accidental nuclear attack would appear. What is surprising is how both of them depicted the possible event, and how, despite their immense differences, both ended up being, in my opinion, masterpieces. First, a brief rundown of both films. Failsafe is a tense thriller, almost a horror, that sees the United States and USSR attempt to stop a group of bombers that, due to a malfunctioning computer, have received orders to carry out a nuclear strike on Moscow. It is tense, at times abstract, and uses haunting visuals, sounds, and editing to create a deeply disquieting experience. Now, Dr. Strangelove is, different.
It's an obvious comic trick, Mr. President. We're wasting valuable time. Look at the big boy. They're getting ready to clobber us.
It is a satire where a crazed general orders his bombers to attack the Soviet Union. It is a wild ride of a film, filled with iconic and hilarious moments. It is a movie that is beyond prescient, talking about male enhancement nuts, fluoride conspiracies, and terribly designed doomsday devices. Both of these films could not be further from one another in terms of tone, and yet they arrive at the same chilling conclusion. Once the machinery of nuclear war is set in motion, human intention becomes almost irrelevant. Almost no one in these films wants war, and yet the murder of millions still takes place. In Failsafe, the terror comes from inevitability. Lumet strips down the story to bare rooms, stark lighting, and agonizing pauses. The film feels almost theatrical. The horror isn't just that a mistake has been made, it's that every safeguard reveals itself to be tragically insufficient. The famous final act, with its devastating moral calculus, doesn't feel like a twist so much as a surrender to the system's cold logic. Once the world's nations give themselves over to the rationality of body counts and zero-sum thinking, the choice to end the bloodshed becomes impossible. By contrast, Dr. Strangelove treats that same system as inherently absurd. Where Failsafe is rigid and suffocating, Strangelove is chaotic and grotesque. Its war room is larger, flashier, almost operatic, but filled with men who are childish, paranoid, and hopelessly out of their depth. There is a massive distance between the rationality of the leaders in this film and what their actions actually cause. The brilliance of Kubrick's approach is that nothing in the film is entirely implausible, and as the decades pass, the events taking place become more and more believable. The satire lands so effectively because it exaggerates real fears just enough to expose the insanity of the situation. And that's where the two films quietly converge. Both suggest that nuclear annihilation does not require evil, doesn't even require intent. Only systems that are too complex, too rigid, or too poorly understood by those manning them and those who created them to be controlled once they begin to fail. In Failsafe, the tragedy is that good men cannot stop the process. In Dr. Strangelove, the tragedy is that foolish men built the process in the first place. It is also worth noting how each film uses communication, or the failure of it. The hotline between Washington and Moscow, a direct cultural echo of the post-Cuban Missile Crisis world, is central to the structure of both films. In Failsafe, it is a desperate lifeline used with solemn urgency, whereas in Strangelove, it becomes a dark punchline, the source of a polite, awkward, and almost banal conversation in the face of apocalypse. The same technological solution appears in both films, but one treats it as a fragile hope and the other as a bitter irony. At the end of the day, the hotline does not avert disaster. It only helps negotiate the terms of annihilation. The fear of weakness and the need to one-up the Soviets appears prominently in both films. In Failsafe and Dr. Strangelove, generals fight against their president's order to work with their enemies to prevent nuclear war, going as far as to commit treason in an attempt to conceal military secrets. In Strangelove, General Turgidson butts heads several times with the Soviet ambassador, insisting that letting him into the war room will compromise their secrets. At first, we as the audience roll our eyes at Turgidson's stupidity. The idea that military secrets mean anything in the face of total destruction only highlights the misguided priorities of the United States military. However, near the end of the film, we see that the Soviet ambassador is in fact spying on their plans, opening the other side to the same accusation as the Americans. Both sides are trying to keep their place at the top, no matter the cost. With Failsafe, a general, after receiving orders to disclose top-secret information to the Soviets, experiences what appears to be a mental breakdown, his mind completely unable to cooperate with the enemy. He ends up trying to sabotage the mission, and is forcibly removed from the room. Every upgrade to America's nuclear defense turns against them in these films. In Dr. Strangelove, Brigadier General Jack D. Ripper becomes so obsessed with anti-communist conspiracy theories that he orders the destruction of humanity. Everything in his life, including his own sexual inadequacies, is shifted through his lens of anti-communism and is blamed on them.
I first became aware of it, Mandrake, during the physical act of love.
In both films, the complicated contingency plans against enemy interference makes it impossible to correct mistakes. The planes in both movies feature advanced defenses that render attempts to shoot them down futile. In Failsafe, the pilots are told to ignore any orders telling them to stop their attack, even when it comes from the president or from their desperate families. In Dr. Strangelove, the Soviets' doomsday machine is kept secret from the Americans for purely personal reasons, allowing not only a nuclear war but the destruction of all life on Earth. The idea of a doomsday device itself, one that cannot be disabled even by those who created it, is not questioned by the characters in the film. The only complaint the American government has with it is that they do not possess such a device themselves.
Gee, I wish we had one of them doomsday machines, Stanley.
So the machines of war are the real leaders of a nuclear conflict, from the era that takes place in Failsafe to the internal mechanisms built into the doomsday device in Dr. Strangelove. But Kubrick and Lumet don't blame these devices, but rather their creators. The titular character of Dr. Strangelove is a mad Nazi scientist whose obsession with destruction is matched only by his lingering loyalty to... And there's a similar character in Failsafe, a fervent anti-communist whose only question when it comes to war is how to win, no matter how many die. These two men are given power over the lives of humanity. Both films are just the final domino in a long-running chain of military escalation and ideological paranoia. What makes their near-simultaneous release so fascinating is that they don't cancel one another out. They don't compete against each other. Watching them back-to-back creates a kind of dialectical experience. Failsafe asks you to feel the weight of responsibility, and Dr. Strangelove asks you to question whether the people in charge deserve that responsibility at all.